Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Polestar Pilates Hour. Today is a very special session for me. I'm with a very dear friend and my very first Pilates teacher and previous partner and founder of Polestar Pilates, Elizabeth Larkam. So, Elizabeth, it's fantastic to have you with me today. Thank you so much. Just give everybody a couple highlights. I know most people don't need to have an introduction to Elizabeth. She is so well known internationally, and she is a author of books. She authored The Fascia in Motion, Fascia-Focused Movement for Pilates in 2017. She has a new book coming out this year, looking at health conditions for Pilates teachers and really contributing so much to the Pilates industry. You always have. It's been over, I don't mean to date it, but I want the quantity people to know that it's been over 4 decades that you've been presenting internationally. You and I traveled the world with Ken Endelman for the first 10 years of that, and you certainly were a huge influence in my profession, in my life. So thank you very much, Elizabeth, and it's so good to have you here today. And Elizabeth has a lot of content to share. All right. Well, listen, Elizabeth, I don't want to take anything away. You have so much information. And today, the question that I asked Elizabeth before we, started putting the programming together was really understanding how the fascia can influence the compression and tension aspect of fascia influences exercise selection, how our repertoire of exercises can influence areas that we want to either engage or to relax or to find that balance between that biotensegrity model that we all have in our whole system. And you have been so instrumental as well with working with some of the greats from Europe and Italy and Germany. I know you're dear friends with our dear friend Carol Davis as well, who is also one of the leaders in the fascial world. And so I'm just going to turn the time over to you. While she's getting her presentation ready to go, I do want you to realize we'll be putting up a lot of the links. All right, Elizabeth, the time is yours.
Thank you so much, Brent and Polestar, and thank you for that warm welcome. It's marvelous to be with colleagues and friends. We've been together shaping the world of Pilates for decades. Today's presentation is Fascia in Motion, movement science melded with fascial science. I did my original Pilates Method Alliance certification exam in 2005, and I still remember how to figure out which is leg pull front and leg pull. The book Fascia in Motion was the first book to bring the fascial science to a detailed examination of fascia-focused movement in Pilates. The book is already 7 years old. It came out in 2017, and I probably started the research for that book in 2001. So it took a long time, but I'm old, and so I've got plenty of time to put to it. So the book has been translated into 3 languages, and I very much enjoy teaching in South Korea and also in China, where the book is a textbook for continuing education courses. The upcoming book, Pilates Applications for Health Conditions, is co-edited with Madeline Black. Pilates Applications for Health Conditions, Programs, and Perspectives. And we can very much look forward to that coming out in September 2024. Every day, 8 days a week, I'm workshopping material with clients, 5 days a week at the Pilates and Gyrotonic Studio in downtown Mill Valley, the town just north of the Golden Gate Bridge where I live. And I'm teaching online movement classes most mornings of the week, focusing on different props. So anytime you'd like to jump into one of my classes, Ada Wells, who's the Polestar Master Educator, she runs the platform Be Well, Stay Well. The book Fascia in Sport and Movement, the second edition in 2021, gives us a functional definition of the fascial system. The fascial system consists of the 3-dimensional continuum of soft collagen containing loose and dense fibrous connective tissues that permeate the body. The fascial system surrounds, interweaves between, and interpenetrates all organs, muscles, bones, and nerve fibers, endowing the body with a functional structure and providing an environment that enables all body systems to operate in an integrated manner. But wait, there's more. It incorporates elements such as adipose tissue, adventitiae, and neurovascular sheaths, aponeuroses, deep and superficial fascia, epineurium, joint capsules, ligaments, membranes, meninges, myofascial expansions, periostea, retinacula, septa, tendons, visceral fascia, and all the intermuscular and intermuscular connective tissues, including endomysium, perimysium, and epimysium. So now that we've been through that, it's probably time to get down on the mat and do some exercises, because that's a brainful. And no wonder fascial research is so relevant for manual therapy and movement therapies. In the first edition of Fascia in Sport and Movement, I authored the chapter that applied the fascial research at that time to the Pilates world. And here you see a composite photo of people you know and love doing a repertoire from the Joseph Pilates work. The fascial system is the richest sensory organ, and it gives a diverse and extensive innervation field to contribute to interoception, proprioception, nociception, and emotions. Brent and I will be teaching our respective workshops at Pilates on Tour in Phoenix just over a month from now, where I'll focus on the interoception and proprioception aspects of the fascial system in Pilates. Let's take a look at Joseph Pilates on the step barrel in the deck in the country in order to appreciate his phenomenal genius in exploring the various vectors and continuities from proximal to distal and distal to proximal. And we'll note that he gives a demonstration of core control in all the different planes and combined planes of motion. You can appreciate that he is activating the deep front myofascial continuity, and that he's now going into the superficial back myofascial continuity, the superficial front myofascial continuity. One can enjoy Joseph Pilates' genius and appreciate that even though he didn't have access to the research that's coming out of the fascial labs now and motor control labs now, that he did just intuitively, through his kinesthetic sensibilities, come up with ways to activate all the different aspects of the neuromyofascial system. So he'll keep going, and we're moving on to the, and you know, that's really the, I need a shirt that says that. That's my motto, because I've dedicated a lot of attention to the evolution of Pilates, appreciating, recognizing the genius of Joseph Pilates, but recognizing that he passed away in 1967 and I'm still here. And with good fortune, Polestar and Brent and you and I will have the opportunity to study interdisciplinary information and apply it to.
Yeah, moving on. Let's love it.
Moving on. So Jean-Claude Gamberto, a surgeon, hand surgeon, authored the book from Handspring Publishing, Architecture of Human Living Fascia. He also created a number of videos. And in Jean-Claude Gamberto's book, you can look at photographs that he takes when he places a camera an endoscopic camera into a surgical site. So this will give you some initial impressions of the fascial system underneath the skin. There are a variety of expert dissections and surgeons and teachers who are doing fascial work to bring the images and the understanding of the fascial connectivity. Carla Stecco published the very first fascial functional atlas of the human fascial system. And she is continuing the dynasty of the Stecco dynasty that her father, Luigi Stecco, started. Carla Stecco is a professor at the University of Padua in Italy, and her brother Antonio Stecco is a physiatrist. Carla Stecco is an MD. Antonio Stecco is a physiatrist who brings the Stecco work of the fascial manipulation to manual and movement practitioners. Here is one photo, one illustration, one figure from Carla Stecco's book, which I recommend enthusiastically to you. A more recent exploration of the full body fascial system is found in the Fascial Net Plastination Project. There is a mouthful, or saying twice, the Fascial Net Plastination Project. This is the full body plastinet. This project, which was sponsored by and underwritten by the Fascia Research Society in conjunction with the Body Worlds at the Plastinarium in Guben, Germany. Freya is now on a worldwide tour, and you and your studio can get on one of the tour stops when you contact the Fascia Research Society in order to have the plastinets travel to your town, a town near you. Speaking of travel and images of dissection, I enthusiastically recommend Gil Headley, PhD, at his website, gilheadley.com. Gil Headley is on a phenomenal tour of the whole United States with his slideshow of fascia photos and videos. The Nerve Tour shows his year-long dissection of the nervous system. John Sharkey, a clinical anatomist, teaches in Scotland at Dundee, and has many opportunities for you to study in the dissection lab. So a couple of relevant quotes. From Rumi comes the quote, "Sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment." I signed up for that when I started studying the fascial system. And I saw this quote recently in an email from Tom Myers Anatomy Trains, in which they were offering an opportunity to participate in a dissection workshop. For sure, think you're clever for a minute, think twice about it, and just sign up for bewilderment.
Know anything, right?
Exactly. And another quote that really caught my attention from a webinar is, "You cannot innovate without a foundation." So we've done our due diligence, and you can do the 100, you can teach the 100, you can teach someone how not to hurt themselves in the teaser, and you can teach someone how to do a teaser that's for them. And then you can just get over yourself and get interested in something else that's relevant to movement education, such as biotensegrity. This is a second edition of the book by Graham Scarr, published. The first book was published, I think, in 2015, and his second edition in 2018, Biotensegrity, the Structural Basis of Life. Graham Scarr and his colleagues in biotensegrity world, headed by Dr. Stephen Levin, MD, have recently published an article called "Moving Beyond Vesalius: Why Anatomy Needs a Mapping Update." This was published in just a couple of months ago in 2024, this year, in the Elsevier journal, Medical Hypotheses. This is a brain twister. And you have done your due diligence in studying anatomy, and now it's time to upgrade, at least recognizing with the possibility that the anatomy that elevates or puts on a pedestal, what's that called? Biomechanics?
Mhm.
Well,
We hear this
let's
change in the wind.
exactly. And we better really do our homework for this one, because as an enthusiastic movement educator, I can sometimes find myself going into places where I ought not to be speaking. Okay. Um, there are a couple of references I bring to your attention regarding human embryology and developmental biology. Let's take a look at the of computer animation that shows limb bud appearance and elongation during embryological development. This is relevant because it can give you and your clients some understanding and appreciation of why the neuromyofascial system is continuous from proximal to distal, from fingernails to heart center, from toenails to the pelvic outlet tissues. Because when someone is amazed at your fascial, at your cues, your movement cues, and says, well, why is it when I move my hand this way, as if in a yoga mudra, why is it that I can feel such and such an activity in my mid-thoracic area behind my heart center? Just bring them to the attention, to the awareness that the tissues that create the upper limb bud and the lower limb bud that create your arms and your legs, those tissues were streaming out from the torso and differentiating as they travel. So that's why the whole neuromyofascial system is continuous throughout your structure. That understanding of the fascial system can inform our movement cues informed by movement of the tongue, movement cues informed by movement of the fingers. And it's just fascinating to tell, as I told a client yesterday who was having difficulty accessing her lateral pelvic stabilizers following a nerve damage in a hip replacement surgery and psoas release. If she pressed her tongue into the lower left cheek, just on the outer aspect of her lower teeth, then she would have an easier time talking, but she would have a lot easier time accessing the lateral pelvic stabilizers of the gluteus medius. So more information on the tongue, but we're going to keep our tongues loose and wagging and move on now. The homunculi, which has been was at one time provided a map of the sensory and motor cortex, has since been upgraded, but it gives some awareness to you as movement educators about how important the sensory fascia as a rich sensory organ, and fascia as an organ which includes many mechanoreceptors, which are very significant for giving us proprioceptive input and a knowledge of where we are in space. Your fascia as a sensory organ, in chapter 15 of the book you saw previously, Fascia in Sport and Movement, notes that the plantar fascia can contribute to sensory motor regulation of postural control in standing. And we can use that in our Pilates footwork on the chair, the reformer, etc., but also using a variety of small props, many of which were not available to Joseph Pilates, but are excellent ways of giving sensory stimulation and proprioceptive stimulation to the foot ankle. Now, Brent mentioned the importance of Pilates mat exercises that explore the interplay of tension and compression in the body. The Joseph Pilates mat exercises, which you You've by now paid for all of your continuing education with the number of times that you have taught the Pilates mat exercises. And we can group those. I group those Pilates mat exercises into likely similar uses or organization of the torso. Here you see inflection in the sagittal plane, and still inflection in the sagittal plane with articulation of the spine, in extension in the sagittal plane. Note we're still in the sagittal plane. Yes. And then coming to the lateral myofascial continuity with the sideline leg kick and the kneeling side leg kick, a different orientation in space, the opportunity for rotation, which is less in the Pilates world, but very important for the neuromyofascial system, and the opportunity for closed chain or closed kinematic context of the palms in contact with the floor and mat, and the soles of the feet in contact with the mat. I got interested some years ago in expanding the mat work vocabulary that where Joseph Pilates didn't get to, but I thought it would be interesting to give a closed kinematic context to the high kneeling side leg kick and take that into standing side leg kick with a spider woman like feeling with the palms spread wide and the pads of the fingers in contact with the wall. So that can give an appreciation of the continuity of the neuromyofascial system from pads of the fingers to the soles of the toes, especially in the down right photo when you're in plantar flexion. And then recognizing that the Pilates mat exercises, in my opinion, could use more opportunity for rotation. And there's a chance here in closed kinematic context for thoracic rotation and thread the needle. And then the very well practiced exercise in quadruped of, quote, bird dog, or I'm suppose it has other names too. They escape me now, but here's an opportunity to put that quadruped all fours core control in the context of hip extension with the sole of your foot on the wall and the palms of your hands aligned with your shoulders for thoracic rotation. And at least one of these variations is going to catch you completely by surprise. So buckle up. Okay. You can take that exercise into, or the quadruped exercise can come to high kneeling and then come to standing. And in order to activate all the neuromyofascial continuities, not just lines, as sometimes people shorten the Tom Myers work of anatomy trains and talk about the fascial lines. But I think that does a disservice to what the fascia research shows us, and the biotensegrity research shows us also, that we are volumes. We are volumes of pelvis, thorax, and cranium, and volumes of the torso in continuity with the volumes or the tubes of the limbs. There are a number of models of movement that contributed to my exploration and that can be helpful to you also. Muscles and Meridians, the Manipulation of Shape from Philip Beach. Biotensegrity, the Structural Basis of Life. We've mentioned Graham Scar's book and Jean-Claude Gamberto's book, The Architecture of Human Living Fascia. In terms of the architecture and anatomy of fascia, there has been a proliferation of beautiful books that can bring our attention to this. And this is from the time that my book started the research in 2015. You see the books that were present in the field then and recognize that there have been many more since. A very significant contribution to bringing the entire awareness of fascia to movement educators, manual therapists, and movement educators. A very appreciative acknowledgement to Tom Myers, who wrote Anatomy Trains Myofascial Meridians. I think the first edition came out in 2001. That was a wake up for me. In terms of myofascial maps, there are many opportunities now to map the myofascial system. Professor Dr. Andre Vleeming brought to our attention with Diane Lee the posterior oblique sling system, the anterior oblique sling system. I mentioned the Stecco dynasty with Luigi Stecco, the physiotherapist, and his children, Carla Stecco, MD, and Antonio Stecco, Thomas Myers, and certainly there are other people who are mapping the myofascial system. Now, it's much more common for myofascial system mapping to be brought to manual therapists and much less common to be brought to movement practitioners. But that's our job. So what's new? What's new to us? Like, well, no, it's up to us to take that research and figure out how doing our best work in a movement laboratory, not a research laboratory, not a dissection room. Thank goodness that's cold and hard and doesn't smell so good. But in the movement laboratory, that's where we do our work, drawing inspiration from perhaps other models, the work of Joseph H. Pilates, the work of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, the work of Philip Beach, of Eric Franklin, of Iyengar Yoga, of Taoist Qigong, and of organ motility and osteopathy from embryology to clinical practice. Graham Scarr made an example, or brought to us an example of an integrated structural and functional hierarchy. This particular slide, this figure from Graham Scarr's book, first edition 2014, you can use this in conjunction with the embryological development video in order to appreciate the interconnectivity of the neuromyofascial system. Here's a figure of the thoracolumbar fascia that I mentioned in the context of Andre Vleeming's work. This is a very significant multi-layered, multi-level structure that makes a very important contribution to the trunk control and core control, connecting the volumes of the pelvis, the thorax, the cranium, with the tubes of the limbs. More information there about the thoracolumbar fascia. Now, the Stecco work is fascial manipulation, and that is taught to a physiotherapist, to manual therapists and osteopaths, chiropractors, to clinical practitioners. I have not taken the courses from Carla Stecco and Antonio Stecco, but I know a number of you as physios will be studying with them in order to get a much more a very, very detailed understanding of the fascial continuities from the viscera and to all the different levels and layers of the fascia. We'll come now to some movement slides and videos in order to start my understanding and to make the my growing understanding available to other Pilates teachers and to my clients. I thought it would be useful to bring an understanding of the Thomas Myers myofascial continuities to particular exercises from the Pilates curriculum. And here you see my client using the Wanda chair, in this case the combo chair, for plantar and dorsiflexion in order to bring compression to the head of the femur into her acetabulum so that she could enjoy appropriate compression even though she had a considerable labral tear. Now, it is as fascinating as this is. It is time to move on because I promised Melissa and Brent that I would present for 30 minutes and then I would listen up with appreciation to your observations, and comments.
Elizabeth, thank you. As always, there is so much information in there, and there are, as you mentioned, years of study and knowledge that you bring to the table for us. There are some questions on the table, a couple things that I was making note of. One with the stucco work, and next week we're going to have Wojciech coming on, the founder of Zoga, that's going to be talking to us a little bit about the manual therapy side of the fascial work that Elizabeth just mentioned. And today I really wanted the questions to be around the idea of us as movement practitioners, while we have Elizabeth on, to ask questions of how this fascial science really impacts us, the new language, the idea where Carol Davis says bone is crystallized fascia, the idea that the muscle filament theory is pretty much on its way out the door. And again, it's a theory, but as we have more and more information, and another thing that I would love for you to talk a little bit about, Elizabeth, is the idea of the Golgi organ in the fascial system as it pertains to human orientation to gravity. We now know that's one of the biggest feedback mechanisms for our proprioception and interoception. I know that's something you're going to be talking about at the POT. So just with that moving forward, we have our first question from Elena, and she's asking what, the future of fascial studies and really the interest of, and I don't know where Elena's at in her understanding of it, but what else is there that we don't know about the fascial system, and how can we gain that knowledge? And so I'll let you just open it up. You've given us so many resources already that everybody on this presentation and those on the recording will have access to those resources. So I don't want you to feel like you have to write everything down. Melissa will make sure that's available. Elizabeth, maybe answer Elena's question as to, I think more how you have evolved the way you think with the new knowledge of fascial science.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Brent. The neuromyofascial system, as noted, is the richest sensory organ, and consequently, it informs interoception, one's emotional state, and that may not even be yet made it to conscious acknowledgement and to verbal articulation. So I recommend to you that you study aspects of fascia in terms of interoception, and you can do that by reading the chapter Fascia as a Sensory Organ in Fascia in Sport and Movement. And then refine, based on that understanding, refine your cues, your tactile cues and your verbal cues, using very, very light touch in order to stimulate the superficial fascia, and using your verbal cues to encourage your client to feel deeply or feel inside, so that when the client says, for example, I really have never felt this side of my ribs before, and you'll go, okay, or not something like, you won't go, okay, you go, really? Well, I'm moving on. I have an exercise to do. No, instead you'll say, oh, please say more about that. Or how do you notice that? So I use open questions a great deal in order to encourage a dialogue and a conversation that brings interoception to the fore.
Yeah, I love that. We certainly have been putting a lot more focus on internal feedback as a result of our external feedback, and that's exactly it, of the open question. What do you feel? What do you observe? And digging deeper. I think also the question that comes up here is how do we use this new information? And I shouldn't say new information, it's 2 decades old and much older than that with Ida Rolf. But I think as it's coming forward with the new research that is objectifying it, it's making it so that it no longer is witchcraft, as Carol Davis often says. It's witchcraft first, then it's clinical, and then it's evidence-based. We are seeing the evidence-based manifesting with the research that's coming forward. And it's always a challenge to interpret the research in its application to movement. And I think this is where, how do you look at movement, Elizabeth, when you're looking at these imbalances? You have clients that come in and you identify, talking about the biotensegrity model of designing exercises and modifying exercises because that's what you see in your client. That's what you see, that balance between the tension and compression of the biotensegrity model.
Yes. I can give you a play-by-play, Brent, of my client, and we will discuss tension and compression here.
Awesome.
Okay, so here is Jake, and Jake is on the Coraline with the ladder. So he has a closed kinematic context in a dynamic environment. Um, at and When he was age 18 months, Jake was subjected to shaken baby syndrome. He was not expected to survive. He was not expected to walk. And when he was 11, his mother saw that I was going to be working at a studio, opening a studio in Northern California, and she thought that the background of Pilates and Feldenkrais would be helpful. So Jake has decreased motor control on his left side. And you can appreciate that in this Coraline vocabulary with which you are familiar, that that this movement, it's for him, it's high novelty but low risk. And he is experiencing, as he pushes the carts back, he's experiencing an increase in compression, and then having to control the cart to return. And we now finish with Jake in tension and compression, climbing up the ladder in order to touch the ceiling with his left hand, which experiences a lot of neurological difficulties. But so that, Brent, that would be maybe an example
Yeah.
of how you can use tension and compression there.
I love that combination. And the next question feeds right into that, where it's like the examples of comparing the contrast of how we cued for so long of biomechanic. And I haven't done muscle cueing for over 20 years, but many people still do. But looking at how we shift the cueing of that, the kinematic chain you talk about of where we close it, where it's dynamic, where we lengthen, where we compress. How are some examples of changes you've noticed in your cueing as you've continued to evolve into more of this, the mindset of the fascial system in the elasticity of movement? I love the concept of just elasticity and playing with the biotensegrity model. Completely changed my impression of how bones support and participate in movement. So maybe enlighten us a little bit on some things that you've found yourself shifting your language to. And you've always had such eloquent language to begin with, but I would love to share that with this population.
Thank you so much, Brent. I keep an editor on my shoulder, and she's exceptionally fierce. And she, like you, I will not let a muscle cue come from my mouth. And I try to gently reframe or rephrase client self-talk and client language. So it's when a client says, "Oh, I feel that in my glutes," and I say, say more about that. And then they'll point out a particular area, and I'll say, yes, you can intensify that in this exercise if you, for example, put your tongue here. And they'll do that and go, oh, now I can stand on one foot much more than I could at the chair before. Or I'll say to the client, this particular exercise that we're going to do now, for example, for example, would it be? Bridging with rotation on the reformer. In this particular exercise, turn your navel to shine the light from your navel to the window side of the studio, or turn your navel to the right side of the studio. I'll try to avoid right and left, but that would be an example for
Yeah.
so I could say.
We both have been good friends with Eric Franklin for decades, and just again appreciating a lot of the external and the direct and indirect cueing that Eric brought to a lot of the language of movement practitioners. And again, thinking of body parts moving through space and less of something that is contracting and, or stretching. And I do find that to be incredibly valuable in teaching movement. Donna Parisi does a little shout out to you and me. And Donna, good to have you on the show. There's another one that talks about teaching therapeutic Pilates in rehab settings, as well as work with clients who have impairments and disabilities. Is there a resource that you can recommend, Elizabeth, for proprioceptive work for those with sensory processing disorders like autism or on the spectrum? That's a pretty good question.
You know, and it really brings tears to my eyes
Yeah.
because really, what else is there to do? When you have the skills that you have, the people who are on this call, on this Zoom meeting, when you have such in-depth, so many decades of study, and you can bring your attention to people who can really value the value the richness that's available in the Pilates, the gyrotonic studio. Let's see. There would be, of course, the work of Stephen Porges on the polyvagal theory. That can be helpful. Um, the textbooks from occupational therapy, that would be helpful for people who are not occupational therapists, but who are interested in more information about the um, sensory awareness and bringing sensory attention prior to proprioceptive training. Increasingly now in my own practice with clients, and in the classes that I workshop 4 mornings a week, I'm bringing much more attention to sensory cueing and also particular props that augment the Pilates environment, props with which you are familiar, such as the oeuvre, the balance sit, and the aligner, the more recent prop from the Pilates, from Ken Endelman of Balanced Body. I find that paying attention to the texture, the resilience of the prop material is very significant for clients of all capabilities. And so you can look to those to augment your studio work.
Yeah. I again can't emphasize enough working with some of the special populations that sensory is by far our greatest teaching tool. And if they are impaired in one sense of sensory, they have heightened sensory in other areas or gifted in other areas. I remember we had a wonderful experience with Special Olympics in one of our conferences. And one of the young men got up and made it very clear that he does not have a disability. He has diffabilities at times, but he has also great gifts that far exceed our abilities. And so I think that a lot of times it's us exploring the idea of getting out of how we process information and exploring how others process information. I think that's why that open question and looking for that internal feedback and looking to facilitate the internal locus of control become so much more powerful uh, for us in making change or facilitating change in people's awareness. And that, to me, the best part of our work. It's the most beautiful part of our work there is. There's another question that came up from Elena, and she says, do we have any studies about a difference of work or reaction of the fascial system as on a stable ground or stable structure versus on unstable surfaces? So again, probably looking at some of the Golgi organ response and if there's a difference when we work on things like the OOV or on some of the mobile surfaces that you certainly have mastered over the years. I know you enjoy them more than probably anything else in the of making those challenges.
Mm. Well, let's just say that the older I get and the more that my neuromyofascial system changes, the more necessary it is for me to practice those things. I don't just fly around like I used to. On the subject of the question that you asked, question that was posed by Elena regarding stable surfaces versus unstable surfaces. Elena, given your fascination with this field, I hope that you're ready to take on a master's project. Maybe you could enroll in a master's program, far better you than I, at a university that focuses on motor control. I don't know of particular research projects that will differentiate between the fascial contributions to stable surfaces versus dynamic environments. I can point you to or suggest that you take a look at Fascia in Sport and Movement, second edition, co-edited by Robert Schleip and Jan Wilke, Wilke. Jan is a professor at a university in Germany. Apologies, I don't know which one. And he is exceptionally familiar with the research that is relevant to athletic endeavors. My client that you're looking at here is in her 60s. She had surgery as a teenager on both feet. It's just barbaric surgery that should never have been done then, is not done today either. So she has a great deal of scarring and a disruption of proprioception in her feet. Consequently, she is wearing shoes on the arc. Believe me, we didn't start the session with this exercise. She had built up to it. And it gives her, she has vestibular difficulties and neuropathy in her hands and her feet, but it gives her an opportunity to develop her lateral pelvic stabilizers, which are very beneficial for improving her standing and her gait.
Mm. Excellent. Another topic that has just been asked by Mitra or Mitra Callaghan, and looking at how, and you did have some video clips of children and children with challenges as well as normal children that are able-bodied, and looking at sort of the research. And to me, this is where everything sort of comes from. I think of, Feldenkrais, and I think of looking at just studying normal human development. What are your thoughts on us understanding teaching children and facilitating children in movement from a fascial perspective?
First of all, it's wonderful that you're drawn to that. And second, it's probably a good idea to take a note from the quote that you cannot innovate without a foundation. And I think that the foundation would be, first of all, your understanding of teaching movement in the Pilates environment, so that you're very familiar with the tools of the trade in the Pilates environment. And second of all, to study child development, which you can do in your occupational therapy studies that will emphasize the motor learning, motor control of children, and recognize that children are not just smaller or lighter adults, but they go through, as we all do, as we age, various stages of neural development and cognitive development as well. Mhm.
Yeah.
And then apprentice to somebody, maybe apprentice to an occupational therapist, so that you can observe their work prior to during your work with your clients. Jake came to me at age. His mother brought him to me when he was age 11, and we worked in turning his motor control work into play and into athletic endeavors.
Hmm. One of the things too, when we think of motor control or motor learning, is the task. And that's how humans learn. We want to be proficient in our task. And so anytime that you can create a task with a child that is motivating to them, you're more likely to get the participation. And I was thinking of Helen Mason was somebody that you met Helen from University of Miami. She was a pediatric physical therapist and talked a lot about just the communication through play and the communication through task. And so a lot of times, if you can think of our Pilates exercises relating to a task that a child would do, you're going to have more success of it, maybe even changing the names. You won't be punished in the Pilates police for changing the name to something that makes sense to a child that is playful. And again, one of the things we look at is the idea of alignment and load. So you did that eloquently with the Coraline, is you created the alignment and the load and the demand of the task, and then climbing the ladder. The natural neurological response happens, the fascial response happens because of the task. And so the more repetition of the task, the more the nervous system and the fascial system will acquire that movement. Um, I see one last question. I know we're out of time, and I know you have some clients that are waiting for you. Just any references or universities as you sort of gone through? I know a lot of European universities are having some more advanced studies and some great work coming out in Italy and Germany and England and Scotland. Any particular that stand out for you, maybe in the United States, or names of universities that somebody would, I guess that's Rosanna that's asking that would be something to look into?
Um, I can give you a suggestion of where to start down this research interest. That you could get in touch with the STECO group. The STECO group has a fascia research summer school, and that's based in Padua and also online. And also the STECO group um, runs weekly webinars on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Italy time. Each week is a different webinar, a different topic, that you can get some background and get introduced to the community there. Carla Stecco runs a dissection laboratory in the summer in Colorado, and in Montreal at another time during the year, um, for a complete um, visual input. You can go to Gil Headley's website, gilheadley.com, and become a Somanaut. Another great resource is the Fascia Research Society. And the Fascia Research Society provides in-person conferences every 2 years, and also some opportunities for further study. So I think that the Fascia Research Society could guide you towards the academic environments where there are fascia studies going on.
Yeah, and that particular, they have a conference pretty much every year, correct? I mean, that's where I would start if you are, really interested, and this is the place to network and to find connections and, to meet great people like Elizabeth and like Carol Davis and people who have really been pioneers in bringing the awareness of fascia to movement education. Just want to cover a couple things because our time is now ended. And just to remind everybody that Elizabeth will be at the POT in Phoenix. It's coming up on April, and that's in just a couple weeks. So we look forward to any of you. That's the Rehab Summit for Balanced Body, and we expect to have a lot of great activities and education and networking there. So anybody that's interested in that, please join us. We also have Eric Franklin is joining us at the farm, Southwind Farm, at the very end of May. And it is going to be a formal training and then a retreat that's combined with it for 4 days. So you can find that on the website as well. And we're excited to collaborate with Eric again. As always, there's many educational opportunities you can find always on the Polestar website. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. And it's been marvelous. And already I see a lot of the thank yous and excitement, and always a pleasure to reconnect with my first teacher of Pilates and my first mentor. Thank you very much, and wishing you a lot of health and a lot of happiness and joy in movement. And just in closing, Polestar's goal is to bring the world physical, emotional, and spiritual alignment. And we do that through movement. And we wish all of you a very wonderful weekend. And above all things, be kind. And again, thank you, Elizabeth, for being with us today.